Let's listen to Aaron Glenn, the
Let's
head
listen to
coach of the
Moving
New
on.
York Jets, who discussed the fact that apparently there were some players that were not happy with the Jets' decision to move on from one Aaron Rodgers. Let's take a listen.
I understand the reaction of the players, but I will say this. Every decision that me and Mooch make is to win, and to win now. So I understand it, but again, listen, this is not going to be the last decision I make, right? That's going to upset some people, and that's okay, right? But as men, we talk about it. We make sure we keep it in house. That we're going to continue to do.
All right. Well, if you want to
Sound familiar?
Yeah, if you want to keep things in house, probably not the best organization to be with if that's the case, because that doesn't happen there.
But it has a familiar tone to it, right?
Yeah.
Has a familiar tone, and I wonder if it has the opportunity to work in that market. You know, Detroit is a tough, hard-nosed market, but it's Detroit. And I think that when you look at – and when I say it's Detroit, it's not like, oh, well, it's Detroit like something like that, like that's derogatory. What I mean by saying it's Detroit, it's not as big a market as New York City. So if you go into Detroit and you run it up, the cultural deal, you get out into the media and into the community, you're talking about a community that will embrace something that kind of matches who they are. They're tough, they're hard-nosed, they're mill workers, lunch pail, hard hat people. That's Detroit. New York is a different animal. Now, while I will say Aaron Glenn played for the Jets, he knows the confines. He's familiar with the place. And it's interesting that you can hear the same type of energy that we hear Dan Campbell speak with. It's that same type of, moxie and that grit in what it is that he's saying. I just wonder, does that act work in New York City? And now I will say this. Me and I know AG. We had the same agent. I know him pretty well. He's a good man. That's first and foremost. He's a good man. And he's a player's coach. So we've talked about this evolution of what's best for a team. And I would say the best example of what I would think the best two examples would be the team he left and Dan Campbell and the team in Houston under DeMeco Ryans. I think that those two would serve as great examples of what Aaron Glenn will represent to this New York Jets team. I do believe that there is a relatability to him because of him being a former player and being a good former player, not just a former player like that. Like Aaron Glenn was a baller. And people respect his career and people respect his body of work. And I believe that his understanding of the game and his understanding of players, the people in the locker room, I think that will go a long way, Jonas. I really do. I think that this New York Jets team, they have enough talent that if they were to have a guy that they believe in, and listen, we could say, oh, Robert Saleh, or you're up next, who was a former linebacker and played for the Niners and was in the league as well. He was an interim. I don't know. It worked out for my guy, AP. He got an opportunity to coach another year. Didn't work out for you're up next. Yeah. But I just think that Aaron Glenn in this scenario will have the type of buy-in and impact from those players that culturally speaking, even in Washington, that's a good example too. Dan Quinn, former player, didn't play as high level as an Aaron Glenn or a DeMeco Ryans or Dan Campbell, but nonetheless, that respect factor that they have for Dan Quinn, that comes from him being a former player.
I think the part that, and I understand Aaron Glenn's approach because the Dan Campbell effect, and it worked for Dan Campbell, and Aaron Glenn was a really good player and had good years with the Jets. The part that when he says, our goal is to win and to win now.
Yeah.
Like, okay, well, What's the plan at quarterback? Because that's like a big issue that they've had for a long time. And I just don't know. You're not bringing Sam Darnold back, all right, because that would be an admission that, well, we butchered that pretty good. You're not bringing him back. Jared Goff's not going to end up with the Jets. So what is the plan at quarterback? Because
don't think for 2 seconds they're not going to get a Sam Darnold or a Matt Stafford.
they drafted Darnold, and they're going to, like, all these years later.
It might be different. It might be different now.
I think Sam Darnold would have a say in that.
And here's what you got, and you could be right. So it could be maybe a Kirk Cousins. It could be a Matthew Stafford. They're going to get somebody.
They're
going to get somebody.
The only two options better than Rodgers would be a Stafford or a Sam Darnold, and I don't see them getting either. And so you've basically, and maybe this is why players have gotten upset, and Quinnen Williams was the guy who went to social media and said, great, looks like I'm in for another rebuild year. Like, that's the feeling from the players there. Like,
well, you brought in a new coach.
Yeah, well, but
and for what it's worth,
it was after the news of Rodgers being
all due respect, Quinnen,
came out.
You got to be winning to have a rebuild. You got to be coming off of winning to have a what do you mean rebuild year?
But the fact
you got to build.
The fact that those guys in the locker room are like, okay, so now we're going to be worse at quarterback. Sweet. Fun year.
You got to build. There's no rebuild. It's not built yet. So I think that you have to approach things from an awareness factor. You got to be aware of what you are. And that team is not a good team right now. And you got to be aware of that. So you're not rebuilding from – what are they rebuilding from? They didn't win a Super Bowl and now it's cap hell and you had to get rid of guys or this, that, and the other. No, you're working to build something.
And I think you made it harder on yourself when you got less than at quarterback.
Sometimes you got addition by subtraction. And, sometimes it's just not purely about the talent of the player. It's about everything else. And I know you'll say, well, the players liked them. The players liked them. Well, I just think that the other things that are connected to Aaron Rodgers makes it and I think that's going to make it difficult for another team to bring them on.
Well, I think that's unfortunate. As you know,
it is what it is.
As somebody who was featured on Enigma episode 3 for Aaron Rodgers, a dear friend of mine, it's
and
unfortunate
none of that would ever happen if he wasn't that guy that does all this extra stuff.
Yeah.
But that could play against you.
It is Two Pros and a Cup of Joe here on Fox Sports Radio. LaVar, Arrington, Jonas, Knox with you. By the way, you pulled out that pistol quick. You pulled it out.
Let me
fast.
tell you something.
So we're gonna close up shop here.
Walt
with
has to
another
pull out an
edition.
elephant rifle.
Damn.